Tanks, massive machines that combine firepower with armour and mobility. They dominate the modern battlefield, but how have today's high-tech Leviathans evolved? And how do you take them out? Fire! We've all tried to cross a barbed wire fence before. It can be a trifle tricky at the best of times. Just when you think you've made it through, you suddenly get caught in more than one place. Imagine trying to cross line after line of this stuff when someone's firing at you with a machine gun. That's what defined World War I. Trenches defended by barbed wire and machine guns. And it was in response to these that the tank was born. On his way home from the front in 1914, Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Swinton had a brainwave. What was needed, he mused, was a bulletproof armed engine capable of destroying machine guns and of climbing earthworks. They took one of these. This is the modern equivalent, a humble tractor fitted with go-anywhere tracks. They added a bulletproof top made out of boilerplate and a 2-pounder cannon. Brilliant! Yeah! Blast! More ammo required! The original had just 2 drawbacks. Its name, Little Willie, and the fact it couldn't get across big trenches.
They solved both problems with its successor. Long, all-round rhomboidal tracks gave it the ability to cross almost anything, even the widest, deepest trenches. And they gave it a new name, Mother. It's 32 feet long, it's got 2 6-pounder cannons and weighs 28 tons. The whole tank is armoured with boilerplate between 6 and 12 millimetres. This particular section here is a shade under 10 millimetres. That doesn't sound much, but it was enough to keep out the machine gun fire. And inside, there's room for a crew of 8. This is what drove the beast, a Daimler 6-cylinder petrol engine, developing a massive, for the time, 150 horsepower. But get this, the noise in here was so deafening that the crew could only communicate with each other by banging on the engine casing with a wrench to attract each other's attention and then using hand signals. Communication with the outside world was a lot more high-tech, though. Each tank carried a basket of carrier pigeons. It seems mind-blowing that here you have this massive armoured machine rumbling across a machine gun-sprayed battlefield, and its means of communicating is by very unarmoured pigeon. But it was early days in tank development. The Mother Mark I's first went into action on the Somme on the 15th of September 1916. They caused utter panic, with the German soldiers abandoning their trenches shouting, "The devil has come! The devil has come!" The tank had arrived. The decisive elements of tanks, mobility, firepower, armour, had proved decisive, just as Swinton had predicted. But their communication system needed to be a lot better. But despite its success, as soon as the First World War was over, the tank was largely ignored by the British, French and Americans. How wrong could they have been, as next time around they faced this. It was the massed might of Germany's all-new Panzer divisions. Whilst Britain, France and America had put tanks on the back burner, Germany had done completely the opposite, pouring vast resources into tank development. This is a Panzer III. It's fast, 30 miles an hour, it's got great armour, 50mm, and it packs a pretty decent punch with its 50mm cannon. At the time, everything you could want in a tank. And the Germans put it to brilliant use in their all-new blitzkrieg warfare. The tactics behind Blitzkrieg were simple, centering not on the Panzer's armor and firepower, but its mobility. In the summer of 1940, thousands of Panzers smashed holes in the Allied lines, then caused mayhem as they raced behind them, cutting off communications and destroying headquarters. It was a tactic that made Germany masters of France in less than 6 weeks.
So here we are in the Panzer III. I'm in the radio operator's seat. Mike is in the driver's seat. Paul, our sound recorder, is sitting in the gunner's seat. And Robin, our cameraman, is operating the camera from the tank commander's seat. You kind of know you're in a German tank because everything is absolute quality. You can see the design and thoroughness has gone into this tank. It just defies belief that it was designed in 1938, way ahead of its time. Brilliant. For a tank, it's actually a very good working environment, believe it or not. But it still would take a very special kind of person to be a member of a tank crew.
The sports car-like Panzers swept all before them until they invaded Russia in 1941 and came up against something completely different. A machine that took armor, mobility and firepower to a whole new level.
Somewhere in this tank garage full of silent war machines is the tank I'm looking for. Not this one, it's a Centurion. Not this one, it's an M41. That there is a Chieftain Challenger hybrid, test bed for the Challenger. There's a Comet over there. This is the one I'm looking for. It's a Russian T-34, one of the greatest tanks of all time.
The Russian T-34, as basic as they come, but it was utterly revolutionary and stopped the German panzers dead in their tracks.
But what's so great about it? Well, for starters, look at the front and look at the sides. Unlike the panzers, which had flat sides, these are sloping.
Now that's really, really clever, because it effectively makes the armor work as if it's much thicker than it really is.
How? Well, if you take my plasticine armor and my rivet projectile, with vertical armor, the projectile has to travel that far to fully penetrate. With sloping armor, the projectile has to travel that far to fully penetrate. Quite a difference.
By sloping the sides, the T-34 could carry less armor, which meant better speed and mobility.
Wow! This is amazing! To turn, what I'm doing is I'm stopping the right-hand track and powering up the left-hand track. Apparently to save space and weight, the Russians used to use female tank crews. They need to be pretty strong women, because steering one of these is a muscular commitment. It's 37 litres of V12 diesel engine, much more economic than the petrol-powered Panzer. This tank had a range of about 250 miles compared to the 100 miles of the Panzer. If the Panzer was a sophisticated German sports car, this is a Russian tractor.
But what a tractor! This brilliant tank beat the Panzer III hands down. It was much more mobile, had much better armor, and much, much more firepower.
The Germans needed answers, and this was one of them.
the Tiger I, the most feared tank of all time. It had immense 110mm armour, twice as thick as the Russians. And it had a truly and utterly and mind-numbingly powerful gun. With this 88mm gun, the Tiger I could take out any other tank in the world without that tank coming anywhere near close enough to penetrate the Tiger's armour. And that is what made the Tiger I so special. In July 1943, the Tigers met the T-34s 500 miles west of Stalingrad at the Battle of Kursk, the greatest tank battle of all time. The Germans had been preparing the attack for months, pouring tanks into the Eastern Front.
But the Russians got wind of the plan and waited to ambush them with thousands of T-34s. The Germans started their assault in Panzerkrieg formations. Arrowheads with Tigers at the apex and Panthers and Panzer IIIs and IVs behind them.
After days of fighting, the Tiger-led Panzerkriegers were rolling the Russians back. So, with one final throw of the dice, the Russians decided to throw their entire tank force at the Germans in one go. On the morning of July the 12th, 1943, the two massive tank armies met head-on.
To negate the superior German armor and firepower, the Russians hid themselves in a dust cloud and got in really close.
At point-blank range, the Russians could penetrate the German armor. The casualties were horrific. The Kursk campaign cost the Germans 100,000 men, the Russians 250,000. But it was the Russians who won.
The T-34's victory at the Battle of Kursk marked the beginning of the end for the Germans on the Eastern Front. From that point onwards, they were rolled backwards.
The invention of the tank brought an all-powerful, unstoppable monster to the battlefield. Only, it wasn't unstoppable. No sooner had the first tanks, the Mother Mark Is, been invented, than people were developing ingenious ways to destroy them.
The Mother Mark Is were taken on by this little fella. It's called a K bullet. It looks like an ordinary round, but it was much heavier.
You can see how it works with this air rifle. We've got two pellets here, both the same caliber. The one on the right is lighter and slightly shorter than this heavier one. Let's see how they go, shall we? The ordinary light pellets just bounce off the tank's armor. But if we put one of the heavier boys in, we should be able to blatter it a little bit more severely. I think that was fairly decisive, don't you? Unfortunately for the K bullets, they were fairly easy to defeat. The British simply increased the thickness of Mother's armor. This, however, was less easy to defeat. It's a shaped charge and it caused havoc with tanks in World War II. The whole warhead is made out of explosives, but it's carefully shaped inside so that when it explodes, the blast is directed inwards to the core where there's a big lump of copper. Let's give it a go, shall we, with one I made earlier. What's the expression? Retire to a safe distance. We have ignition. In 3, 2, 1, fire! The exploding shaped charge creates a jet of molten metal that cuts straight through tank armor, and it doesn't need a big gun to fire it. This is a Panzerfaust, a rocket-propelled stick with a shaped charge on the end. It was carried by the Germans. Carrying a shaped charge, any infantryman hiding in a hedge could take out a tank. The British Home Guard had their own mad version, the sticky grenade. The sticky grenade's main drawback was a tendency to stick to the user's trousers, which gave the said user a tad under 7 seconds to remove said trousers
and apply them, along with said grenade, to the side of the tank and then leg it before it exploded. Even more barking mad than the British sticky grenades were the Russian anti-tank dogs. Go on, off you go, dogs! Once they were trained to find their food under tanks, they had TNT strapped to their backs and were released when the German tanks came over the hill. Not nice, I know, but the dogs proved to be cleverer than the Russians expected. They'd been trained to find their food under Russian tanks, and the dogs could tell the difference. Instead of taking out the Germans, they made a beeline for the nearest Russian column with disastrous results. Revenge is sweet, my little lady, eh? In response to the potent anti-tank threats arrayed against them, the Germans came up with their ultimate tank, the King Tiger. It was the heaviest and most powerful tank of World War II. But in the end, even that wasn't enough.
This is absolutely huge. It weighs 75 tons and the armour is, look at that, 150 millimetres thick. That's 10 times the thickness of the armour on World War I tanks and 3 times thicker than the armour on a T-34. This thing is practically indestructible.
And as well as all the extra armour, King Tigers were covered in this strange paste, Zimmerit, which prevented shaped charges from sticking to them. In December 1944, the Germans launched all the King Tigers they could get their hands on in their last great offensive of the war. It took place in the snowy forests of Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge.
This is the tank the high-tech King Tiger had to face in the Battle of the Bulge. It's not remotely high-tech, in fact it's incredibly basic. The Sherman.
There's no fancy thick armour here. They just lashed sandbags and bits of old track onto the side of the turret to try and keep out Panzerfaust-shaped charges.
The King Tiger could hit and destroy this tank from 1,000 meters away. The Sherman had to be within 500 meters to have any effect at all on the King Tiger. But the Sherman had one massive advantage over the King Tiger. There were lots and lots and lots and lots of them.
Car plants all over the United States produced tanks by the thousand. By the end of World War II, 50,000 Sherman tanks had rolled off the production line. The Germans, however, only made 489 King Tigers.
And that's what the Battle of the Bulge came down to in the end, with the basic, reliable Shermans simply swamping the German Tigers with greater numbers.
The world's most powerful, heavily armoured tank had been held at bay by a horde of simple, manoeuvrable, medium-sized adversaries.
And now the old concepts of medium tank and heavy tank have merged into one, the main battle tank, the backbone of all modern armies. This is the British Army's Challenger 2, and what a machine it is. 70 tons all up, heavier than a Tiger tank, and in the right hands with a top speed of 45 to 50 miles an hour, much faster than a T-34, Sherman or Panzer.
It ticks all 3 boxes in what makes a tank great: firepower, armour and mobility. There's a 1,200 horsepower, 26-litre diesel engine in there, and the whole thing's covered in impregnable top-secret armour.
So, Dorchester composite armour all around me, and out front, a big gun. A very big gun.
With a massive bore of 120 millimetres, it's 50% bigger than the gun on the King Tiger.
Which brings me on to why these tanks are here. Throughout this film, we've talked about the firepower of tanks. We haven't actually fired a gun yet. That's all about to change, dear viewers, because this is a firing range.
So there we are, we can see our main target area to the right of the wooded area. In the foreground we've got some moving targets, which are big lumps on a rail, moving backwards and forwards, representing profiles of tanks and trucks. And in the background you can just see there two static targets, which are old chieftain tanks filled with concrete that are sitting duck. There's another one, and yes, it looks like another direct hit. So, what are they firing? Well, here we have a Hesh round, high explosive squash head. Inside here we have plastic explosives. When the head impacts the side of the target tank, it squashes like a cowpat and explodes. The explosion sends shockwaves through the armor of the target tank, blasting off a chunk of the inside of the tank like so. Now, one of these, or fragments thereof, pinging around the inside of a tank would make that tank a fairly unpleasant place to be. Moving on to this finned sabot round. Inside this casing, we have this finned metal dart. No explosives, and it doesn't crumple on impact, which, even on this training round, is about 1,600 meters per second. The dart's doing several times the speed of sound when it leaves the barrel. It stays intact when it hits the target and can punch straight through one side of a tank and out the other. This is an example of a section of armor that was victim of one of these finned sabot rounds. It made quite a mess. Could ruin your day.
It's devastating firepower, day and night.
The noise from those guns is impossible to describe. It's so loud you can actually feel the shockwaves going right through your body. After being out here for 10 minutes, you feel like you've been beaten up. In an effort to show you just how powerful the shockwaves are, I have here a pane of glass. Just watch what happens to it the next time one of these tanks fires. That is massive power. Armor, mobility, firepower. The Challenger 2's got the lot.